My boss's daughter looked me straight in the eye and said, "You shouldn't flirt with me." I should have walked away, but instead, I smiled and whispered, "Then stop smiling like that." That was the moment I knew this wasn't just dangerous. It was inevitable. I never believed in love at first sight. Attraction? Sure. Admiration? Of course. But the kind of sudden shift in gravity people talk about, that never felt real to me. At least, not until the day she walked into the office. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not really. Everyone knew she was the boss's daughter, the kind who only stopped by occasionally, usually to bring her father lunch or to drop off something from home. But that morning, she stepped through the glass doors as though she belonged there, confident, poised, carrying herself with a grace that made the fluorescent lights of our dull office seem suddenly softer. I remember the sound first. The quiet rhythm of her heels against the polished floor, steady and unhurried. Each step made heads turn, though no one dared to stare too long. But I did. I couldn't help it. There was a kind of presence about her, a quiet magnetism that had nothing to do with youth or loudness. She wasn't trying to be noticed. She just was. When she reached my desk, I looked up, ready to be polite, professional. But then her eyes met mine. They were the kind of eyes you don't prepare for, warm, sharp, and knowing all at once. She smiled politely, and it should have ended there. A polite exchange, a moment soon forgotten. Except it didn't. She leaned slightly over my desk, placing a file down for me to pass along to her father. It was the smallest thing, routine, harmless. But as she set it down, her fingers brushed mine. Just for an instant. Barely a touch. Yet it sent a ripple through me I hadn't expected. The kind of small detail you pretend not to notice, but your body notices for you. "Could you make sure he gets this?" she asked. Her voice was calm, low, carrying the faintest trace of humor. Like she knew she didn't really need to ask, that I'd already decided I would. "Of course," I replied, my words steadier than I felt. She gave me a nod, but her eyes lingered. Just a second longer than polite. A second that said, "I see you. And I know you see me." By the time she turned and walked away, the faint trace of her perfume still hung in the air, something floral, light, hard to place. I sat there with the file in my hands, staring at the neat way she'd written her father's name on the folder, wondering why something so ordinary suddenly felt anything but. For the rest of the day, I caught myself listening for her steps in the hallway, glancing up whenever the door opened. And though she didn't stop by my desk again, the image of her smile, half polite, half playful, stayed with me. Looking back, I think that was the spark. Not a dramatic confession or a sweeping gesture. Just a brush of fingers, a lingering glance, and the quiet realization that something had shifted inside me. I didn't know it yet, but the story had already begun. It happened a week later, though the truth is I'd been waiting for it without realizing. I told myself I was just being polite whenever she came by the office, just doing my job. But the truth was harder to ignore. Every time she walked in, the air shifted. And she knew it too. That afternoon, the office was quieter than usual. Most people had gone out for lunch, leaving a kind of hushed stillness broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. She'd come in again, something about helping her father organize a client file. And once more, fate, or coincidence, or maybe just her sense of mischief, brought her to my desk. She leaned against the side of it, arms loosely crossed, her expression calm but her eyes carrying that same playful gleam. We were close enough that I caught the faint scent of her perfume again, soft, floral, familiar now in a way that unsettled me. "You know," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the silence, "you really shouldn't flirt with me." The words should have embarrassed me. They should have sent me scrambling for distance, for excuses, for some kind of denial. Instead, I froze, caught not by guilt but by the way she said it. Not harsh. Not scolding. More like she was warning herself as much as me. I looked up at her, searching her face for the joke, for the smirk that would tell me she was just teasing. But all I saw was a woman holding her composure carefully, like she was balancing a glass of water she didn't want to spill. And that's when the words slipped out of me before I had time to rehearse them. Then stop smiling like that. The silence stretched. Her lips parted slightly, as though she hadn't expected me to say it, and for a heartbeat I thought I'd gone too far. That she'd laugh it off or step away. But she didn't. Instead, her smile deepened, not wide or dramatic, but softer. Almost reluctant. The kind of smile someone gives when they're trying not to give one at all. Her eyes held mine, and for the first time I felt a current run between us that neither of us bothered to hide. It wasn't in the words, we hadn't said much at all. It was in the quiet, in the nearness, in the way either of us looked away. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the faint buzz of the fluorescent light overhead. Mundane sounds, but they only made the moment sharper, more defined. As though the world itself had stepped back and left just the two of us in focus. Finally, she shook her head lightly, breaking the tension with a soft laugh. "Your trouble," she said, though her voice didn't carry judgment. If anything, it carried something dangerously close to invitation. And just like that, she pushed off from my desk, turning gracefully toward her father's office as if nothing had happened. But she glanced back once, just once, her smile still lingering like the echo of a promise either of us was ready to speak out loud. That was the moment I stopped pretending it was all in my head. Whatever this was, it was real. And it was only going to get harder to resist. Late evenings at the office had become a quiet routine for me, just me, a stack of reports, and the low hum of the printer. But that night wasn't like the others. She was there too. Her father had stepped out for a dinner meeting, leaving her to wait. Most people would have gone home, but not her. She wandered through the office instead, idly looking over the shelves, the framed awards, the stacks of files that no one else found interesting. And then, without announcement, she drifted over to my desk. I felt her before I saw her. That subtle shift in the air, the quiet warmth of someone stepping close. She leaned against the edge of my desk, one hand resting lightly on the wood as she looked down at the papers I was sorting. "You work too much," she said softly. Her tone wasn't mocking, it was thoughtful, almost amused. I glanced up, only to find her studying the page I'd been writing on, her head tilted slightly, strands of hair slipping from behind her ear. "Someone has to finish these," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. She leaned a little closer, her hair brushing against my shoulder as she read a line over my arm. The faintest touch, but enough to freeze me in place. My heart thudded once, hard, and I wondered if she could hear it. The scent of her perfume was stronger here, mixed with the faint warmth of coffee she'd been drinking earlier. I swallowed, trying to focus on the numbers in front of me, but her nearness made them blur together. "You really understand all this?" she asked, tapping the edge of the page with her fingertip. Her hand brushed against mine, light, casual, unthinking, but the heat of it lingered. "Most of the time," I managed. She laughed softly, the sound low and warm, and I felt it more than I heard it. That laugh carried something unspoken, a kind of ease she rarely showed. For a moment neither of us moved. Her shoulder grazed mine as she leaned in, her hair spilling forward. I could feel the warmth of her skin through the thin sleeve of her blouse, could see the faint line of concentration in her brow as if she were truly invested in a page of numbers she probably didn't care about. And then, almost too quickly, she pulled back. Straightened. Composed herself. "You make it look easier than it is," she said, her voice light again. But her hand lingered on the edge of the desk just a fraction longer, fingertips brushing the wood as though steadying herself. I looked up at her, wanting to say something, anything, that might break the spell and also deepen it. But the words stuck in my throat. She met my eyes for only a moment before looking away, her lips curling into a smile that was far too knowing. "Don't work too late," she said quietly, and then she was gone, her steps fading down the hall, leaving the echo of her nearness pressed into the air around me. That night, long after she left, I stared at the reports without seeing them. The memory of her laugh, her shoulder against mine, the brush of her hair, it was all sharper than anything on the page. And I knew with certainty, These small, accidental moments weren't accidents anymore. They were the beginning of something neither of us dared to name. It was late afternoon when she suggested a walk. Not in the office, not where eyes might notice or whispers might follow us, but outside, where the streets were quieter and the world didn't seem to care who we were. We left the building together, her pace unhurried, mine uncertain. The city around us hummed with its usual rhythm, cars passing, voices in the distance, the faint golden light of the sun beginning its slow descent. But as we walked side by side, it felt like the noise had dimmed, leaving us in our own small bubble. She was different out here. Less polished, less deliberate. Her arms weren't crossed defensively as they often were in the office. Instead, her hands were tucked loosely into the pockets of her jacket. She looked ahead as she spoke, as if the words might come easier if she didn't have to see my reaction. "Do you know what it's like?" she began quietly. "To feel like people only see you for who you belong to, not who you are?" I glanced at her, but her eyes stayed fixed on the sidewalk. There was no playful gleam this time, no hint of teasing. Just honesty, raw and unguarded. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to, but I knew this wasn't the kind of question that needed fixing. It just needed hearing. So I walked beside her, letting the silence stretch until she filled it again. "Everywhere I go, I'm the boss's daughter. Not me. People are polite, overly careful, or worse, too eager to impress. They don't actually talk to me. Not really." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone ever will." The sound of her voice cut through me, not because of the words themselves, but because of how quietly she said them. Like she was afraid of admitting too much. I wanted to tell her she wasn't invisible, that she was more than just her last name. But the truth is, I didn't think words alone would reach her. So I stayed close, letting my silence be the answer, listening, not filling the space with things that might sound hollow. After a moment, she glanced at me, as if testing whether I'd drift away like the others. I didn't. I kept step with her, steady, present. Her expression softened, just a fraction, before she quickly looked forward again. The vulnerability was brief, but it was there, like a crack in the armor she wore so carefully. The streetlights flickered on as the sun dipped lower. A soft breeze tugged strands of hair across her face, and I had to fight the urge to reach out, to tuck them gently behind her ear. My hand hovered at my side close enough that if she wanted, she could have closed the space. She didn't. But she didn't move away either. Instead, she smiled faintly, as if to say thank you, not for anything I'd said, but for the fact that I'd simply stayed. We kept walking, slower now, until the moment passed and she slipped her confident mask back on. But I'd seen behind it, just for a little while. And what I'd seen was enough to change everything. That I told myself it was nothing more than dinner. Two colleagues sharing a meal while waiting for the boss, her father, to finish a late meeting. That was all. Ordinary. Harmless. But nothing about that night felt ordinary. The little restaurant we chose wasn't fancy. A quiet corner place a block away from the office, with dim lights and the faint aroma of baked bread drifting through the air. It was the kind of place where people came to disappear into conversation, where the world outside seemed softer, more forgiving. We slid into a booth against the wall. The cushions were worn, the table scratched with initials, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the space, or lack of it, between us. We sat closer than we had to. Too close, maybe? Our knees brushed under the table, an innocent accident neither of us moved to fix. At first, we kept it light. She asked about my childhood, and I told her about summers spent chasing after things that never really mattered, cheap adventures that now seemed priceless. She laughed, leaning in with her chin resting on her hand, eyes shining with a warmth that made me feel like she was hearing me, not just listening. Then the conversation shifted. She talked about her father, about the pressure of being seen through his shadow, about how tiring it was to always carry someone else's reputation on her shoulders. Her voice grew quieter, her words heavier, and I found myself leaning closer, not to hear better but to feel closer. The clinking of cutlery and soft murmur of other diners faded into the background. All I could see was her. The way the candlelight flickered across her face, catching the outline of her smile when she tried to lighten her own confession. The way her fingers tapped lightly against her glass, nervous in a way she rarely let show. And then there was the pause. That long, weightless moment when laughter fades and silence takes over, not awkward, but charged. Our eyes met across the narrow space between us, and the air grew thick with everything we weren't saying. Her knee pressed against mine, steady now, no longer accidental. I felt the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of my pants, and my breath caught. Slowly, as if pulled by something beyond reason, I leaned in. So did she. Her eyes flicked down to my lips, then back to mine. My hand twitched against the table, aching to reach for hers. The world seemed to hold its breath, and for the first time I thought, this is it. This is the moment we stop pretending. But just as the space between us closed, she turned, so subtly it almost broke me. Her cheek brushed against mine instead, the warmth of her skin grazing me before she pulled back just enough to whisper. "We can't." Her voice trembled on the edge of strength and fear. She looked away quickly, reaching for her glass, taking a sip as though nothing had happened. But her hand shook, and I saw the truth in it. She wanted to, just as much as I did. I sat back, swallowing hard, my pulse unsteady. The moment had passed, but the weight of it clung to me like a secret I couldn't shake. We didn't speak of it again that night. We paid the bill, walked back to the office side by side, and said nothing more than good night. But the silence between us was louder than any words could have been. Because we both knew what almost happened. And we both knew it wouldn't be the last time. After that night at the restaurant, something changed. Not just between us, but in the way she carried herself around me. She avoided me. Not in a dramatic way, no cold glares, no sharp words. It was subtler than that. Shorter replies when I asked a question. Passing papers through someone else instead of directly into my hands. Choosing a chair farther away in meetings when she usually would have sat closer. It wasn't obvious to anyone else. But to me, every tiny shift felt deliberate. At first, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. That maybe I was reading too much into things, that maybe the almost moment at dinner hadn't affected her the way it had me. But then I caught her glancing at me in a reflection on the glass wall, eyes soft, searching, before she quickly looked away. She wasn't indifferent. She was afraid. The distance stretched for days until I couldn't take it anymore. One evening, when the office had emptied and the silence wrapped itself around the walls, I found her sitting at her father's desk, closing a laptop. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, her expression tired. She didn't look surprised to see me. Just guarded. "We need to talk," I said gently. She hesitated, her hand pausing on the laptop lid. "There's nothing to talk about." "There's everything to talk about," I countered. My voice was quiet, careful, but steady. "You've been avoiding me since that night." Her lips parted, as though she wanted to deny it, but no words came. Instead, she exhaled slowly, leaning back in the chair, her eyes finding a spot on the carpet rather than my face. "You don't understand," she whispered. It's complicated. My father trusts you. If he ever thought." She stopped herself, shaking her head, frustration flickering across her features. "It would ruin everything." I stepped closer, not too close, just enough so she couldn't dismiss me as easily. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I haven't thought about every reason why this is a bad idea? I have. Believe me, I have." Finally, her eyes lifted to mine. They weren't playful or teasing anymore, they were raw. Vulnerable. And in them I saw the weight she'd been carrying, the battle between her feelings and her fear. "I don't want to stop caring just because it's complicated," I said softly. Her composure cracked, just slightly. Her shoulders slumped, her lips parted, and for a moment she looked like someone on the verge of surrender. "You make it sound so simple," she whispered. "It's not simple," I admitted. "But it's real." Silence fell again, heavy and electric. Slowly, I reached out, not for her hand, not for anything bold, but just to brush a strand of hair gently back behind her ear. My fingers grazed her cheek, and she didn't flinch. She didn't move away. Her breath caught. For a brief second, I thought she might lean into the touch. But instead, she closed her eyes, steadying herself. When she opened them again, there was a storm in her gaze. Not rejection, something far more dangerous. Desire, tangled with fear. And I realized then, the conflict wasn't between us. It was within her. Days passed, and though we carried on with the same careful rhythm of work and silence, the weight of what had been left unsaid grew heavier with each glance, each unfinished word. It was like standing on opposite sides of a river, close enough to see each other but too far to reach without a leap. The leap came on a quiet Saturday morning. I hadn't expected to see her. I was cutting through the park on my way to run errands when I spotted her sitting alone on a wooden bench beneath a wide, leafy tree. She looked different in daylight, away from the office, less guarded, dressed simply, hair pulled back in a loose knot. For a moment, I considered walking past, sparing us both the tension. But something in the curve of her shoulders stopped me. She looked tired. Not physically, but in a way that came from holding too much inside. So I walked over. She looked up as I approached, and though her smile was faint, it was real. "I thought you'd be working," she teased gently. "I thought you'd be avoiding me," I answered, and her smile faltered. For a while, we just sat there, the sounds of children laughing in the distance, the rustle of leaves and the breeze filling the silence. The world felt softer here, as though it had given us permission to be honest. Finally, she broke the quiet. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice low. "I'm scared of what people will think, of what my father will think. But I'm more scared of pretending I don't feel this." Her words struck me harder than I expected. Not because they surprised me, but because they echoed everything I'd been carrying inside. I turned to her, watching the way her hands twisted together nervously in her lap. "You don't have to pretend," I said. My voice was calm, certain, because in that moment I knew there was nothing left to doubt. "We don't have to have all the